Okay, so you know how everyone's always talking about how fast technology moves? Like every day there's something new.
You're right.
And yet here we are in 2023 and people are still using Windows XP
Millions of them. I know it.
over
It's
20 years later. So that's what we're going to deep dive into today.
really dig into this.
Why is Windows XP such an iconic operating system?
Right?
What is it about this OS that just won't quit?
Yeah.
And we're basing this on a podcast that we listen to. It's called
Yes.
Windows XP, the tech icon. So it got us thinking
It's a
about,
great title, too.
it is a great title.
Yeah.
So let's rewind all the way back to 2001.
Okay.
When XP first came out, it was a huge change.
Huge.
Think about what people were using before.
Oh, I know.
Like Windows 95,
Windows 98.
98 Windows ME,
Yeah, those were the days.
and they were known for like the blue screen of death.
Oh, yeah, constantly crashes.
Constantly crashing.
Yeah.
But XP came along and it was like a totally different beast.
It really was. And a big part of that was the technology behind it. It was built on the NT kernel, which was known for its stability.
Okay, so it was actually reliable.
Exactly. And that was a big deal, especially for businesses. They had been using NT systems for a while, but bringing that kind of stability to everyday users, that was a game changer.
It was like bringing in the big guns to the masses.
Yeah, exactly. No more blue screens of death, at least not as often.
So that was huge. But it wasn't just about what was going on under the hood,
Yeah.
right? XP also had a totally new look.
Oh, yeah, big time. Rounded icons, bright colors. It was a very different visual experience.
And people had some thoughts about that design, didn't they?
They did. The podcast mentioned that some people found it a bit toy-like, almost unprofessional.
Toy-like, I kind of get that.
Right. It was a big departure from what people were used to.
I think it's interesting how design can be so polarizing.
Oh, absolutely.
What's considered modern and fresh in one era can look completely different just a few years later.
Yeah, it's like fashion trends. It comes and goes.
Totally.
Oh.
So XP's look was definitely a statement at the time. But let's be honest, it wasn't just about the aesthetics.
No way. XP brought a lot of really cool features to the table.
Like what? What do you remember?
Oh, man. Plug and play was a big one. Suddenly you could connect devices without having to mess around with drivers and settings. It just worked.
Right. And then there was the improved Wi-Fi support. USB connections were easier too.
All those little things that made computing so much more user-friendly.
And it's crazy to think about how much we rely on those features today.
I know. It's like XP laid the groundwork for how we use computers now. We take Wi-Fi and USB for granted, but back then it was a big deal.
They were game changers.
Totally. But of course, no tech is perfect, and XP had its share of issues too.
Especially in the early days.
Right. I mean, this was around the time when internet use was really exploding.
Yeah, everyone was getting online.
Exactly. And unfortunately, early versions of XP had some security vulnerabilities.
And the podcast talked about that.
Yeah, they made a good point. It's like the more people who are online, the bigger the target becomes for hackers and malware.
So it was kind of a perfect storm.
Right. But to their credit, Microsoft did step up and release Service Pack 2,
SP2, I remember that.
which significantly improved XP's security.
Yeah, it felt like a turning point.
It really did. It showed that they were taking these issues seriously.
But it also highlights how security is like an ongoing battle.
Oh, absolutely. It's constantly evolving. There's always a new threat around the corner.
So true. Okay, so we've talked about the rise of XP, its pros and cons. But here's a big question that we really want to unpack.
Okay.
Why is it still around? It's like a technological zombie that just won't die.
I know. It's fascinating. The podcast gave 4 main reasons for XP's enduring popularity.
Hit me with them.
All right, so first up, there's compatibility. Think about industries like healthcare or finance. They often have these really specialized systems that rely on older software.
Software that only works on XP.
Exactly. So for them, upgrading to a new operating system isn't just an inconvenience. It could mean their entire system goes down.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Like their whole operation hinges on this 20-year-old OS.
Right. And then there's the issue of resources. In many parts of the world, people simply can't afford the latest and greatest hardware.
Right. It's not just about having the newest iPhone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And XP can run on some pretty old machines. It's surprisingly lightweight.
So it's really practical in those contexts.
Absolutely. But let's not forget about the nostalgia factor.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
That iconic startup sound, the Bliss wallpaper, it takes people back.
It's like a time capsule to the early 2000s.
Exactly. And for some people, it's more than just nostalgia. It's about familiarity and comfort. They know how to use XP. They're comfortable with it. It just feels right.
I get that. We all have those things that just feel comfortable and familiar.
It's like a warm blanket on a cold day.
Perfect analogy.
Ah,
And then finally, there's the cost factor.
yes. the bottom line.
Upgrading an entire system, new software, new hardware training, it all adds up.
It can be really expensive, especially for businesses and organizations.
So sometimes sticking with XP just makes financial sense.
Right. It's like if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Unless it's a security risk. Right.
Well, there's that. Which brings us to another point that the podcast made, the challenge of obsolescence.
What do you mean by that?
Well, technology moves so fast that it can be hard to keep up, especially when you have systems that need to be reliable and secure over the long term.
It's not like you just swap out a critical piece of infrastructure every few years.
Exactly.
Like-
So how do we balance the need for innovation with the realities of long-term use and accessibility?
That's a really good question. And it makes me think about those people who are still using XP today.
Yeah, the podcast had some advice for them.
Did anything stand out to you?
Well, the first thing they emphasized is that using an outdated operating system like XP comes with inherent security risks.
Right. It's not something to take lightly.
Exactly. So the advice they gave wasn't about endorsing staying on XP, but rather about harm reduction.
Okay, so if you have to use XP, how can you do it as safely as possible?
Well, one of the most important things is to use a good third-party firewall and antivirus software.
Since Microsoft isn't providing security updates anymore, right?
Exactly. You're on your own out there.
So extra protection is key.
Mm-hmm.
What about virtual machines?
They mentioned those too.
Could that be a way to use XP more safely?
Definitely. Running XP within a virtual machine on a modern system basically creates a little sandbox environment.
I like that. A sandbox.
It isolates XP from your main system and the internet, reducing the risks.
So if you absolutely have to use XP, keep it contained.
Right, like a wild animal.
Exactly. And of course, minimizing internet use on any outdated system is always a good idea.
Always.
Yeah.
The less exposure to potential threats, the better.
It's like keeping a vintage car in the garage most of the time,
I love that analogy.
only taking it out for special occasions.
When you absolutely need it.
And then finally, they also talked about keeping your applications as up-to-date as possible.
Within the limitations of XP, of course.
But still, every little bit helps.
Exactly. So it's all about being aware of the vulnerabilities, taking steps to protect yourself, and minimizing risk.
Not ideal, but sometimes necessary.
Right. Now, I know the podcast also included a Q&A section. Do you want to go through some of those common questions about XP?
Yeah, let's do it. Fire away.
Okay, so first up, the big one. Is it safe to use Windows XP today?
I think we already know the answer to that, but
The short answer is no. Not really.
not unless you're really careful.
Right. But as we've discussed, there are situations where people might not have a choice.
And that's where those harm reduction strategies come in.
Exactly. Understanding the risks and mitigating them as much as possible.
Okay, next question. Why do some governments and industries still use XP? We touched on this, but any other insights?
It often comes down to those legacy systems we talked about,
Yeah.
specialized software and hardware that are just too expensive or complex to replace.
Right. It's not a simple upgrade.
Not at all. And sometimes those systems are so critical that even a temporary disruption could be disastrous.
Okay, that makes sense.
What about this one?
What about this one? What made XP so user-friendly compared to earlier versions of Windows?
Well, features like plug and play were huge.
Yeah, we talked
Right.
about that.
But also, the redesigned start menu, improved search functionality, simplified networking. They really thought about how people actually UUC computers.
For design is all in the details.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. Can you upgrade directly from XP to a newer operating system?
Well, that's a good one.
Unfortunately, no. Most modern operating systems require a clean install.
So you have to back up your data and start fresh.
Exactly. It can be a bit of a hassle.
Okay, last but not least,
Yeah.
why was that Bliss wallpaper so iconic?
Ah, Bliss. It's more than just a pretty picture. It became a symbol of XP's identity.
It's instantly recognizable.
Right. That image of rolling green hills and a blue sky evoked a sense of optimism, of user-friendliness, of a world of possibilities opening up with this new operating system.
It's funny how a simple image can become so iconic.
It is, and for many people it evokes a strong sense of nostalgia.
It's like a visual representation of a whole era in computing.
Exactly. So I think we've done a pretty thorough job of unpacking this iconic operating system.
I think so too.
Yeah.
What are your final thoughts on Windows XP, knowing what we know now?
It's clear that Windows XP was more than just an operating system.
It really was.
It was a cultural phenomenon, a technological turning point.
I like that. A turning point.
And its lasting impact speaks to the power of good design, the complexities of obsolescence, and the evolving relationship we have with the technology we use.
And I love how the podcast called XP both a relic and a practical tool.
It's kind of both, isn't it?
It is a reminder of how far we've come, but also of the challenges that come with rapid technological advancement.
So we have a question for you, dear listener. What does Windows XP represent to you?
Is it nostalgia practicality or something else entirely?
Perhaps you have your own XP story to share.
Maybe it's your first computer, or you have a funny memory of that iconic startup sound.
Whatever your experience,
We encourage you to take your own deep dive into your tech memories.
it can be fascinating to explore how technology has shaped our individual journeys.
And who knows, maybe you'll discover something new about yourself along the way.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny how some technologies just stick with us. They become part of our collective memory.
Like Windows XP. You
Yeah.
say those two words and people instantly have a reaction.
Totally. It's like an instant time machine back to the early 2000s.
Right. Like the internet was taking off, but we didn't have smartphones yet.
It was a different world.
It really was. And it makes you think about the connection between technology and culture.
Yeah, how they influence each other.
It's like they're intertwined.
Definitely. And it makes you wonder what would happen if XP came out today.
Ooh, good question.
The impact would be totally different. The tech landscape has shifted so much.
It's true. Like in 2001, XP was groundbreaking.
It felt like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, a major leap forward.
But today, with everything we have, fast internet, cloud computing, mobile devices,
XP would seem almost like a relic.
quaint even.
Quaint. I love that word.
It's fitting, though. It's like a reminder that technology keeps evolving.
What's cutting edge today might be nostalgic tomorrow.
It's a cycle. Innovation, adoption, ubiquity, and then eventually nostalgia.
And sometimes a comeback in certain niches, like we've seen with XP.
True. It's never a straight line. So, thinking about this evolution, what do you think people will be nostalgic for in 20 years?
Oh man, that's a tough one. It's like trying to predict the future.
It is. But we can look for clues in what's happening right now. What technologies are shaping our lives today?
Okay, so give me an example. What tech do you see having that staying power?
Well, smartphones, for sure.
Yeah, they've completely changed everything.
How we communicate, entertain ourselves, access information. It's hard to imagine life without them now.
So you think in 20 years we'll be reminiscing about those early iPhones and Androids?
Maybe. Like, remember a time before constant connectivity when these little devices felt almost magical?
I could see that.
Hmm.
What about social media? That's got to be up there.
Social media is tricky. It's had such a huge impact, both good and bad.
Yeah, it's hard to know how we'll view it in retrospect.
We're still living it. It's
Ah.
like trying to write a history book while the events are still unfolding.
We need more distance to really grasp its full impact.
Exactly.
So
Okay, so smartphones, social media. What else do you think might spark nostalgia in the future?
Ooh, that's a good one.
This might sound niche, but I think virtual reality and augmented reality have potential.
VR and AR.
Yeah.
They're still pretty early days.
They are. But the way they blend the physical and digital world, that's fascinating.
Like imagine looking back at those first clunky VR headsets and laughing.
Right. Or those early AR games that had everyone running around chasing digital creatures.
Pokemon Go.
Exactly. It's easy to dismiss these things as fads, but they're pushing boundaries.
And that can lead to unexpected cultural shifts.
Totally. We don't even know how they'll shape our lives yet.
But they're definitely planting the seeds for future nostalgia.
I think so. And that's what makes it so exciting to think about. We're living through an era of incredible technological innovation.
So what will the next 20 years bring?
What will be the next Windows XP? The next icon that captures a specific moment in time?
Those are great questions. What do you think will become objects of nostalgia in the future? Let us know. But while we've been talking about what might be iconic in the future,
Right.
we haven't really talked about what makes something iconic in the first place.
Good point. It's more than just being popular or technologically advanced.
Like what elevates something to icon status?
I think it's a combination of factors.
Lay it on me.
First, innovation. Did it introduce something truly new? Did it change the way we do things?
Like XP bringing stability to the masses. That was huge.
Exactly. And then there's cultural impact. Did it become deeply ingrained in our lives? Did it reflect or shape societal trends?
Think about all the movies and TV shows that featured Windows XP.
It was everywhere. It became part of the visual language of that era.
It really did.
Yeah.
And then what else?
Emotional resonance. Does it evoke strong feelings? Nostalgia, comfort, even a sense of identity?
Like the Bliss wallpaper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's more than just an image. It represents a feeling, a time and place.
So it's like a perfect storm of factors. Innovation, cultural impact, emotional resonance.
It all comes together.
And it's not just about the tech itself, but how it connects with us.
how it shapes our lives and leaves a lasting impression.
Well said. I think that's what makes these tech icons so fascinating.
It's not just about the gadgets themselves
It's about understanding our relationship with technology.
and how it shapes who we are.
Absolutely. It's a reflection of where we've been and who we are.
Right.
And maybe one day we'll be looking back at something we use today
With the same sense of wonder and nostalgia.
that we now feel for Windows XP. You know, it's wild to think about how much technology has changed just in our lifetimes.
I know, it's mind-blowing.
We've gone from those like big clunky desktops to like smartphones that can fit in our pockets.
And who knows what's next? It makes you wonder what will be the next Windows XP.
Ooh, yeah. Like, what's that piece of tech that people will still be talking about decades from now?
Right, that will have that same staying power, that iconic status.
Exactly. What do you think? What will it be?
Well, I don't think it'll just be like a slightly better version of what we have now.
Okay, so not just like a new iPhone or something.
True. It'll have to be something that fundamentally changes how we live and work and interact with the world.
Like a real paradigm shift.
Exactly. Think about like the printing press, the telephone, the internet.
Okay, yeah, those were huge.
They weren't just novelties, they revolutionized everything.
Okay, so what could be that next big leap?
One area that I find really fascinating is the intersection of technology and biology.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We're already seeing incredible advances in bioengineering, gene editing, personalized medicine.
It's true. It's moving so fast.
So imagine a future where devices can monitor and even adjust our health in real time,
That sounds pretty sci-fi.
or technologies that allow us to interface directly with our brains.
Like brain-computer interfaces. I've heard about those.
Exactly. It's like moving beyond simply using technology to actually merging with it.
Wow. That's a whole other level.
And of course, it raises all sorts of ethical and philosophical questions.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's the kind of disruptive innovation that could define a generation.
It's like those future generations might look back at us and be like, wow, they were still so limited by their physical bodies.
Right. Just like we might look back at people in the 19th century and wonder how they lived without electricity or modern medicine.
It's all about perspective.
Exactly. So maybe the next XP won't be a single device or piece of software, but a whole new way of understanding our own humanity.
That's deep.
But it makes sense. Technology is always a reflection of ourselves.
Our values, our aspirations.
Exactly. What we create and how we use it tells a story about who we are.
I love that. So it all ties back to what we were talking about before. Nostalgia isn't just about the gadgets themselves.
It's about what they represent, the memories, the emotions, the connections.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Windows XP, it's clear that it's much more than just a piece of outdated software.
It really is.
It's a symbol of a specific time, a reminder of how far we've come, and a glimpse into what the future might hold.
Beautifully said. It's been a fascinating conversation.
I agree. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this journey.
We hope you enjoyed it.
We hope it sparks some curiosity about the technologies that are shaping your own lives.
And maybe even inspired you to think about what the next XP might be in your world.
What innovations will you look back on with a sense of wonder and nostalgia?
Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and as always, thanks for taking this deep dive with us.